Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to the panel discussion on Satcom Global Learnings for India. I am Mansi Taneja from Economic Times Satcom. Just to add in a little context before we start the discussion, satellite communications is being touted as the next big technological revolution. India's huge market size and potential has attracted many global players like OneWeb, Starlink. Globally, the market is expected to grow at a CGR of around 12%. It is high time for the Indian stakeholders to look at the trends in global markets that are already harnessing satellite connectivity for a variety of use cases. India has taken a leap ahead with the new space policy and other measures. The panel discussion today will revolve around global trends in this space, how space broadband will complement terrestrial networks, and the various use cases that are being emerged. We have an eminent set of speakers today. Ms. Laura Roberti, Director for Spectrum and Market Access, Telesat. Mr. Bashir Patel, Senior Regional Advisor for Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa, Inmarsat. Mr. Rahul Vatts, Director, OneWeb, India Communications. And Mr. Bharat Bhatia, President, ITU-APT Foundation of India. Let's start with Laura. Satellite communications has seen a lot of momentum, including merger and acquisitions recently. What are the trends, especially on the service delivery front, that you are seeing globally?
Hi, hello. First of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure and an honor. And thank you also for your very pertinent question. This that you mentioned is a trend that is becoming apparent now towards consolidation and partnership. And is driven on one hand by the presence of multiple satellite operators, which justifies for a degree of consolidation among them. On the other hand, this is also driven by the need towards strategic alliances for exploring and exploiting synergies between GSO and non-GSO orbits. Another major trend that we are seeing at the moment is towards smaller satellites, and in particular towards LEO satellite systems. This truly reflects a transformational process that has already started to drive market growth, and it will only increase as more non-GSO operators will come to the market. It is now well understood that LEO high-capacity systems will offer an unprecedented amount of capacity at low latency. This, together with major technological progress, also in relation to flat panel antennas for user terminals, is always driving down costs. So the overall attractivity is clear and the market already shows it. Furthermore, all these factors combined will also play a key role in the UN goal for global meaningful connectivity. A third trend that we see is for the role of satellites in the deployment of terrestrial 5G and 6G networks. Many providers are in fact looking at ecosystems, so-called ecosystems, that comprise of both a terrestrial and the satellite components. Once again, the presence of LEO systems will be a game changer, especially when it comes to providing backhauling capabilities, because these LEO systems will provide literally a virtual fiber network in the sky. Furthermore, systems like Telesat Lightspeed will be ideally suited for this type of application, because they will allow an easy integration with the plug-and-play system, and also the adoption of technical standards that are compatible with the terrestrial ones. So overall, this synergy between LEO satellite systems and terrestrial mobile operators will lead to an improved customer experience and will undoubtedly create value for terrestrial mobile operators. Another trend that we note is towards the internet, so-called Internet of Things via satellites. In fact, many of these IoT devices will be located in hard, remote, difficult to reach areas that are best served via satellites. And this is also a type of application that typically requires also low bandwidth and can be also be well served by small sats, which is, as I already mentioned, another current trend. Finally, the last point that I would like to mention is direct to device. There are now multiple operators offering different models, especially when it comes to use of spectrum. And in particular, one of these models involves a direct partnership between one satellite operator and one terrestrial mobile operators. And I'm mentioning this because we see this as a part, is another indicator of this more general trend that pervades the industry at the moment towards integration, synergy, complementarity between different technologies and services.
Right, right. That was very interesting. Mr. Bashir, your company has been present in India for quite some time. So, going by the current situation, are you seeing any change in the policy making and regulatory regime of late? And also, if you could elaborate a bit on your business plans for the Indian market.
Firstly, thank you very much for inviting Inmarsat and myself for joining this panel discussion on the way forward. As regards to Inmarsat's presence in India, as you know, this has been for quite some years now. In terms of regulatory changes, I think most regulatory regimes are opening market access to SATCOM services now. And this process has been very much gradual. Inmarsat's been fortunate enough that Government of India was one of the founder members of Inmarsat through IMO, which was established in 1979. And Inmarsat went operational in 1982, almost 42 years ago now. So as a founding member, India established its own gateway in Arvi, near Pune, and provided satellite communication services initially to the mariners, maritime, such as the Indian Shipping Corporation, which has over 600 odd ocean-going vessels, Indian fishing fleet, and of course the Indian Navy, as well as the offshore oil rig activities that India has, and so on. So since then, the portfolio of Inmarsat services offered in India has expanded into in the mobility space. And this includes now in-flight satellite communication services to broadband connections on trains and moving vehicles and so on. In fact, now we're moving towards the personal handheld phones for certainly emergency and disaster communications, where terrestrial coverage is impossible. And of course, Inmarsat handhelds are playing a vital role in disaster communication, particularly for the first responders in India. So today, market access situation is open in India to domestic and international operators, directly or through local partnerships. And clearly to develop satellite communication applications, very much seen as a homegrown kind of thing, to have it made in India. So there is much that can be offered by Indian space technology companies that can develop numerous applications for various market segments across the board, such as agriculture, for example, health, education, financial inclusion services, which is very much in demand across the country, e-government services as well, and access to e-government services. So community-based satellite communication networks are really there to provide connectivity to support these kind of applications. The scope in India is very much unlimited. The government needs to incentivize technical startups, technology startups really, to innovate and do more in the satellite communication space sort of arena. And I think there is a lot of opportunity to develop these things in India right now.
Great, great. Rahul, moving on, what role do you think India will play in developing the space communications market? What are the kind of opportunities that have come for the players globally, and also in the context of India, if you can talk about it?
I think the first thing to be said is that while India started, in terms of services in the satellite domain, we have been much behind some other countries in the past. But the things which we have been able to do in last few years is really what is making this very interesting story. So more than I think 90 plus countries are today operating in the space domain, and around 13,000 companies is what was mentioned actually in the Deloitte report, which was done by the space regulator InSpace. There are more than 3,000 investors in the space economy. There are more than 340 hubs globally, and there's a huge amount of R&D which is happening. The global space economy itself is touted to be around $447 billion, and it is expected to reach, as per some reports, to more than $600 billion by 2025. Now, if I look at India out of this whole big market, we are just at around 2.1% of the global space market, in India. So clearly, and if I go as per the InSpace own calculation, we are expected to reach around $12 billion by 2025. So I think that really sets up the space for us as far as the space sector is concerned. Already we do have a large amount of 190 startups which have come up in over the last 2 to 3 years. And this Indian Spacecom policy, which the Honorable Prime Minister revealed in 2023, has really set the stage for a huge amount of investment and innovation to happen in the space sector. And I think what is going to be important for India is that India may not only just serve India. Knowing India's potential, India is likely to be a hub for satellite services for neighboring countries also. So if you are setting up gateway stations out here in India, most likely you will be able to serve other geographies on our surrounding countries. So as to say, if you really have to look at it. In terms of what is there in the market, I think we being a LEO connectivity provider as OneWeb, we are really looking at applications which are going to drive lower latencies and higher speeds. Laura already mentioned about the concept of virtual fiber and the backhaul, which I will not dwell on more, but that is exactly one of the major applications which we'll have. But this amount of latency and speed is really going to set me up into doing a lot of services to security agencies, for example, across deserts and mountains. Look at healthcare cases and education cases, which we are already serving in some of the isolated communities, say in North America, where we are already giving some of these services. So this is really like a full broadband experience, which we are able to develop and provide even to the enterprises per se. We have a large amount of use cases on education. We have been working very closely with the Indian government on some of these use cases, and we are very hopeful now that there is extreme clarity in terms of how things are going to proceed in this sector. We are going to see a lot of use cases actually getting triggered now. And this is really going to aid then the next wave of potential and opportunities for this business. Because what has really happened is there is clarity now on there is going to be investment. There was a cloud whether there is going to be an auction spectrum or administrative spectrum. And that the government has clarified, the Indian government has clarified the Spacecom policy. The InSpace, the regulator has been made. So I think in terms of a regulatory structure and edifice, everything is in place. So I think that really gives you a lot of strength. What we still are looking for, some clarity is on the FDI part, the foreign direct investment part, which is still something which we are waiting and we are hopeful is going to happen. But as in any sector, it's a nascent sector in India. And I think we would require hand-holding by the government. For example, today, can satellite services get the USO subsidy fund, which is available to the government for really proliferation of the services across the country? Can we look at the TRAI, for example, recommended a zero license fees for wireline services to promote the wireline services? Can we look at a similar regime for the SATCOM services in India, right? Can we get a regime where you don't have to pay license fees for 5 years or 10 years, similar as to what is being proposed for the wireline services? I think those are, and then, go on to the other part is the availability of capacity, right? Today, there are restrictions, let's say in broadcasting space on using BSS, right? So we are hoping they'll get much more clarity on these sectors. While the government has really done a large amount of its track, I think little more clarity on other parts is really going to trigger this mass explosion, which we are sure we are going to see in India happening.
Great, great. Since you are talking about the use cases, what kind of opportunities are you seeing in-flight connectivity and maritime communication? Bashir did mention briefly about it, but if you could explain a bit more on that.
Yeah, so I think the in-flight connectivity right now, as we are seeing, honestly, sometimes is a very broken journey, right? Because you are able to take, let's say, your mobile or your laptop, inside an aircraft or even for maritime use, and then you use it in a particular way. But really, with the, what we are talking about in future is very different. For example, can you go into, enter into aircraft, and can your own cellular plan serve you to provide the plethora of LEO services also, for example, right? That is going to really enable the journey for you as a customer. Because right now it's broken that I'll do this and then when I enter, I'll do something else. But if we can start unifying those journeys, that is really going to make a difference. The other large part is that as India's potential is rising economically, there's a huge amount of maritime traffic which is now increasing. This whole hub, if you go from Southeast Asia going all the way to Middle East, and there's a lot of logistics, which is increasing across the zone, and that is a very huge maritime potential, which is slowly and slowly developing, knowing at the how things move across those lines. So that really power, and there is a flourishing business of cruise, for example. We have seen some famous and not so famous cruises happening across our own, ocean lines. But I think that's a rising potential in terms of what you can do. Now, what we feel very enthusiastic about is that after our merger with Eutelsat, we do have a plethora of offerings now on every scale. So we have offerings coming from Eutelsat which will be available to us. They are already serving several use cases which are there, for example, in fishing. For example, ONGC oil rigs. Last week, I was in discussion with some people in the ministry about actually testing out our services on oil rigs, for example. Right? Can we really go there and provide something better out there? Tourism, I already mentioned, is a huge amount of thing. And also, let's not forget, Mansi, that 70% of this earth is still ocean, right? So that's where you are. So in terms of whatever you can do, that is really a transformation which is available. We already are serving as OneWeb large amount of oil rigs in UK, right? Which we are already working with, and the low latency really helps out in those cases too. In India, I think in addition, there is going to be a huge case for disaster, particularly in terms of disaster, readiness, and how ready we are to power up on a given day. Because we have seen in the past, whether it is floods or whether it is any natural disaster, the impact immediately comes out to the cell networks. But thankfully, with satellite communication, you can really break that barrier also, and you can be ready on the very next day to be able to take the road ahead. So it's a huge amount of use case, amount of speed you are offering. So I think that is really going to help out both in flight as well as the maritime connectivity.
Great, great. That was quite interesting. Mr. Bharat, you recently attended the ITU World Conference in Dubai. So what were the key decisions relating to SATCOM, and how do you think these will impact the segment in India?
Yeah, thank you, Mansi. I think that's really something many of us, at least Laura, Bashir, and I, we spent 1.5 months in Dubai. This is kind of a mecca for telecom and including Satcom. And this conference was very intense. Many times it went on for 24 hours. We spent many sleepless nights in that conference. But end of the day, I think it did achieve a lot, particularly in the area of Satcom. Satcom was, I must say, at the center stage of the whole conference. And more so, the next conference that's going to happen in 27, where the agenda was driven in this conference, was developed in this conference. 80% of that agenda belongs to Satcom for the next conference. You must see the importance of satellite in the whole range of ITU regulations. Now, looking at what the main achievements were, you were just talking about the in-flight connectivity. Actually, eSIMs, as we call the Earth stations in motion, which is like what happens on the flight or on a ship or even on a train. eSIM was one of the most important decisions of this conference from satellite point of view. And not just in this conference, but in a row, this is the third conference where eSIMs got new spectrum, new rules, and new allocations. So I think that was one of the great achievements of this conference, that now we have a almost full complement of spectrum needs for in-flight connectivity, for shipping, and for mobile use on trains, etc. So all the three, land, sea, and air connectivity worked. The second, and this was one of the most controversial activities in the WRC, was about the C-band, which is a very famous band, 6 gigahertz band, as all of you have seen. The amount of issue that happened, I think it captured the center stage. That is a band which is being used by the satellites at the moment. ISRO has a lot of usage of that band. There was a proposal also for giving that band for mobile services, for IMT or 5G, 6G. And then there is also a proposal for Wi-Fi to use parts of that band. And that was one of the most intense discussion, and it impacted India in a big way, because in India, we are planning to use that band also for mobile services for 5G, 6G. But we have satellite services in the country, which we need to relocate or reform into some other bands. That issue was on center stage practically till the last day of the conference. And finally, a solution that was found surprised many, and I think it's a very simplistic solution, that there is already a spectrum in the upper 6 GHz band for 5G, 6G in parts of the world, particularly in the Europe, Middle East, Africa. And in India, it will happen in the next conference. And that decision has already been made, that from 27 onward, that spectrum will also become for 5G, giving enough time for the satellites to relocate into other bands or find some other solutions by which they can coexist. Third, and another very controversial, and that's where the issue between compatibility between the GSO and non-GSO. The geostationary satellite orbit and non-GSO, the LEOs and MEOs. There is a particular ruling that the limit on the power that the non-GSO can radiate is limited by certain regulations. And this has been existing for many, many years. And the proposal was whether the next conference should review those limits. But on the other hand, the satellite industries, including our own ISROs, have made huge investments in the GSO. And it is not easy to move those satellites into a different power regime. Therefore, I think the agreement which I think was acceptable by all was, let us do some studies first, let us prepare ourselves, and maybe at the next conference we can consider what is the right way to do. So that was another very controversial agenda, but still I think a solution that everybody could accept was carved out. Satellite to satellite links was another area. I think that also was very useful. It will help getting the environmental information from non-GSO, then sent directly to GSO and can be downloaded anytime without delay of time. I think that will be a very, very good from a climate perspective and very useful information. There was a lot of discussion on space sustainability. There's so many non-GSO satellites. We're talking of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. How will they fill up the space? How much space they will take up? What happens to their debris? How sustainable it is? I think there were a lot of discussion, but anyway, that matter relates to not to just the ITU, but also UN. There's a UN treaty, and I think it was moved that there should be something done on that in that area. One more area I wanted to touch briefly. There are many areas actually, and I won't touch all of them. But one learning that I had from this WRC was that this conference relied heavily on the regional groupings. The decisions taken in, let's say, within Asia were respected. Decisions taken within Europe were respected. Decisions taken within Americas were respected. And those groups started playing much higher role than in the previous conferences. And I think that impacts a lot, because the satellites, they move all over, non-GSO particularly, they continuously moving around the globe. And the role of the regional bodies in this World Radio conferences, I think was very, very useful. And I think it will grow further over this period of time.
Great, sir. Great, sir. That was quite a detailed response. And just moving on, Mr. Bashir, if you could, dwell a little bit on how space broadband segment will really complement terrestrial networks. Can you talk a bit on any use case study globally that has, we could provide for this?
I think what we're beginning to see here, and I think this being alluded both by Rahul and also Laura, is that we're forging forward with Vision 2030 and beyond within the Working Party 5D, within the ITU, and also within the 3GPP actually as well, where there's a lot of development that is taking place, which is adamantly very clear that there's a need to have a greater degree of integration of different access technologies. And I think what we're about to see here is emerging within this decade, direct-to-device connectivity, which again has been mentioned by colleagues there, using smartphones. And that's going to operate through a combination of different access technologies. We already have today Apple smartphone, for example, which obviously goes through not just the 4G, 5G terrestrial network, but also Wi-Fi, and now also satellite. I mean, the satellite RF is built into your Apple phone today, which is going through a global star network constellation and so on for emergency messaging applications. But soon, I can see with the proliferation of different kind of networks, both LEO, MEOs, and GEO. I mean, GEOs are also becoming very powerful satellites with certainly several sort of terabytes of capacity. They will be in a position to offer, broadband connectivity, speeds of 100 megabits per second or higher, with combination of any access technology. Now, whether we have 5G or 6G, Wi-Fi 6E or 7, Wi-Fi 7, that's going to come onto the market this year. And of course, satellite communications with a mesh integrated network, combination of using LEOs, MEOs, and GEOs with inter-satellite connectivity and so on. So as we move forward, within this decade, you're going to see enormous amount of development taking place with a lot of different access technology integration. Now, the government of India is also driving hard towards a much greater level of innovation, such as Open RAN, for example, network, which I know is under development. So a combination of network slicing with a vertically integrated applications, which is focused on various markets that Rahul mentioned, will see substantial growth in serving different categories of users within India. And clearly, as I mentioned, financial inclusion, agriculture, health, education, all of these are going to play a very, very important part for different kind of players. I mean, it doesn't have to be just you, it'll be a mesh kind of technology networks. And given India's vastness and population, and so digital transformation, innovation, digital inclusion, this will bring India up to a new height in bridging that digital divide and really bring about much greater level of broadband connectivity through different sort of access technologies. So satellite has a fundamental role to play here. And again, I wouldn't differentiate between GEOs, MEOs, and LEOs. Basically, there will be a mesh network, okay? A combination of mesh network that is there designed to serve together with Wi-Fi technology and terrestrial technology. So I think broadband connectivity is going to be very, very exciting as we move forward towards the end of this decade.
But do you think India is late in joining the Satcom bandwagon? Or
I think India's got a tremendous opportunity. I think India, as Rahul mentioned, I think government needs to incentivize technology startups. Particularly, India has always taken a lead in software development. And software development means applications to serve different market segments. Because the user air interface you have is basically a pipe. That pipe is variable. So it depends on voice application, you have a narrowband pipe. If you have a video, 4K video transmission for broadcasting, then you've got a much larger pipe. And that means a variable air interface design together with different applications is the way that's going to be driving it. India can take a lead in this, in 6G development with this kind of technology. But India government has to incentivize the technological startups that are there, particularly for Satcom and space sort of areas of activities.
Great. Very interesting. Ms. Laura, would you like to also share your views on how space broadband would complement terrestrial networks?
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, there is ample space for integration. One thing is, again, now I'm sort of repeating myself, is the direct-to-device complementarity. But another very important aspect is, again, the complementarity in terms of providing backhauling to terrestrial providers, either satellite backhauling or also last mile access to remote community and in hard to reach places. In fact, satellite technology is ideally suited to provide instant coverage of very large areas. It doesn't matter how difficult to reach, with prices that will be compatible, not compatible, will be actually lower than the terrestrial counterpart. So once again, plenty of opportunity for complementarity in that respect.
Rahul, if I may ask you, OneWeb has ambitious plans for India. So, what's the update on the launch of services in India, and what kind of use cases you see emerging, especially in the Indian market? You did briefly talked about many segments, health and education, but if you can just talk in a little frame, by next 2 years, what use case segment do you see emerging?
So let me first give you an update on where we are. I think we already do have a license in place to be able to provide services, which has been there for nearly 2 years now. We have also become the first LEO operator in the country to get the authorization from the space regulator InSpace, right? So that has also been completed. We had also received an in-principle approval to set up our gateways, which work is proceeding very fast. We are nearing completion in Mehsana, Gujarat, and work is proceeding at a very swift pace at our other site in Sipcot in Tamil Nadu. In terms of the ability to be able to commercially launch our services, I think we are post clarification on the telecom bill. We are telecom law now, actually. We are hoping for an allocation soon, and as soon as we get the allocation, we are up and running with our services. That's our state of readiness now. Already, we do have a demo, spectrum and license which has been given to us by the government, and we can use it. And we have discussing with key stakeholders and users in India to be able to showcase to them what all things which we are able to do. So that's the current status. So we are ready as soon as we have the raw material and the green lighting for it, and then we are ready. In terms of what we are seeing as a potential, as I shared earlier, we have had a very productive and fruitful discussions with the stakeholders, specifically with some security agencies, defense forces, with some oil companies, with the ministries of health and education, for example, to really showcase the services which we can provide, particularly in far-flung and deep areas. Right. So today, if you go to some areas, there is no connectivity for like kilometers together. Right. For those sort of topologies and geographies, is we can easily go on to. I discussed briefly earlier about the maritime opportunities which are available, given that India does has a large amount of maritime border, and so that's a full potential use case for us. I shared about the opportunities on tourism which are there, and of course the biggest use case which I think Laura had triggered earlier is on the backhaul. Today, even though the country has a full blast of terrestrial services, and we as Airtel also are a terrestrial operator, the fact is that only hardly around 30% of the networks are fiberized, right? And you are carrying humongous amount of traffic on 5G networks, right? So where does the backhaul come from? So I think that is a use case which can immediately get triggered. It already becoming, it's not a new thing, honestly speaking, because we already do take capacities, let's say even from Satcom players now as still players. But the opportunity now to be able to carry larger bandwidth suddenly becomes a game changer. So would you rather take a backhaul on a Satcom, or would you rather want to set up a microwave? Will be constricted in terms of bandwidth and speed and capacities, or you will lay out fiber in difficult terrains? So the answer is very simple. You will look towards the Satcom services, and that to me in next 2 years is going to be one of the major use cases, definitely.
Great. Mr. Bhatia, everyone is talking about, connecting different technologies, 6G, 5G, and SATCOM. So what role do you think SATCOM will play in 6G and 5G? How each technology will complement each other?
Yes, I think that's very interesting discussion we are having in all regulatory forum now. And we just now, the ITU finalized the 6G framework document. So we have a clear roadmap now what 6G is going to contain. 5G has already been rolled out in India, and Rahul and Airtel and Jio, we are the fastest rollout in the world of 5G. The question still remains that there are still large areas of geography which are not connected, and those need to be connected. And I think the right economic model for that is to use some kind of a satellite communication for connecting those areas. Backhaul, I think, is really one of the very important use cases for connecting those areas. You just put a tower connected by satellite, and then you are on, both with mobile or with the local Wi-Fi network. So that use case will go on driving. But at the same time, there are still some places you may not be able to reach. And that is where this whole direct connectivity, direct to mobile connectivity comes in. Now, there are different routes to roll out to that. In this last WRC, the first step that was taken was what I call as HIBS, that is high altitude IMT base station. That means you put a 5G base station not on the ground, but at a higher platform, maybe a 20 kilometer, 30 kilometer, and that covers a large amount of area and connects it directly. That is a kind of first step. At the same time, as you know, already mobile phones, the Apple has already connectivity through satellites. There's another thought process. Why can't we use the LEOs also for connecting directly to the mobile phones, 5G and 6G? And to that extent, some spectrum requirements have been projected. We have a full-fledged agenda for the next conference to identify which of the 5G bands can be used for directly connecting into your mobile phones. And that study is now started. In fact, we just now submitted a contribution to the Working Party 5D as to which of the bands of 5G can be selected for that kind of study, so that directly those could be connected into the mobile phones. And that process will take 2-3 years. But by that time, we are in 27 for making that allocation. The technology is ready, and hopefully we will have direct connectivity to most of your phones from the LEO satellites.
So we are almost close to the end of the session. So this last question, I want all the panelists, probably everyone can respond to this. Indian government has taken many steps of late. We have the new space policy. We have the decision of administrative allocation of spectrum. But, these are all kind of positives. But what are the challenges that you feel are still there in the market?
I think I briefly alluded to it while I was in my first question, I guess. I think so. We have all the positives, and the whole landscape is now set, as you rightly put it, in terms of going ahead and investing. What we are looking for are smaller things now, which will give a lot of certainty and a lot of boost, so as to say, to be able to take this to the next level. First of them being that I think we need some good clarity on the FDI policy. The sooner it comes, the better it is, because if you are investing, that it really gives certainty to you. The second is I think, how do we fast track this allocation of spectrum? We have the law has been made, but it has to convert to an actual allocation. And we are hoping that it should not take any much time, because given that there have been allocations done in the past, for SATCOM, services. So that is the real piece, but I think it should not be a showstopper. It should happen immediately. Then is the point which I was trying to capture about how do we really incentivize and take it to the next level? How do we partner, with the government to make these services go faster? Utilize the subsidies available for a lot of services, right? Incentivize and see how do you are going to promote these services, and basically encourage the sector in smaller steps, right? There are huge amount of startups. I mentioned about more than 190 in India. How do we trigger the whole ecosystem so that we are able to take it to the next level of journey? This is what I'll summarize in short.
And if I may continue, I would like really to emphasize how the last 5 years, I would say, they really reflected what I do not hesitate to call a revolution in the India regulatory framework. That was all intended at streamlining, simplifying the regulation, and also allowing the introduction of new application and services. And it all culminated with the new Telecommunication Act in 2023 that has already been mentioned in terms of deciding towards the administrative allocation for satellite spectrum, which was really endorsed and applauded by the global satellite community. But in spite or in addition to all these major progresses that have been done so far, I would like to highlight three areas in terms of forward-looking action possibly in the near future. So first of all, I think there is this issue that also Rahul mentioned in relation to spectrum availability, and in particularly what is the value, the price of spectrum. This really needs to be resolved in a forward-looking manner that does not penalize satellite operators. In particular, in the Indian context, given the recent impetus towards a price discovery process for spectrum that was also partly the base of a possible consideration for alternative allocations rather than administrative. I think in India, again, also on this basis, it would be reasonable to use a percentage of the AGR, which is the adjusted gross revenue. This is a suggestion that was contained in multiple replies to the TRAI consultation and also in the discussion that followed up. This suggestion is also based on the fact that this method of spectrum pricing would actually truly reflect the actual use revenue associated with the spectrum in the country, bearing in mind that satellite spectrum will be shared in a number of frequency bands. A second point that I would like to mention more in general is, and we believe it would be positive as a further step in the future, is a general further alignment with international best practices. And one of these, so in this respect, a positive action, for instance, would be to guarantee a level playing field between the different satellite operators. This would be beneficial to the end user and ultimately to the country by allowing an increased choice of satellite services and also driving down prices by creating a healthy competition. Another aspect in this respect is, for instance, the adoption of regulatory instruments such as blanket licenses, which authorizes a family of terminals with similar characteristics. And this is in opposition to individual terminal by terminal licenses, which are definitely more cumbersome, both for the regulators and for the service provider. Finally, the last point I would like to mention is the unified license. This is a very important piece of regulation, of course, but at least in our humble opinion, it's still very cumbersome and is not really in line with the more straightforward, simplified, streamlined approach that have been adopted in India in very recent times. So in our view, an overall revision, simplification of the framework, it would indeed lead to a major piece of work to be undertaken by the DOT. But we think it would be worth the effort, as the outcome would be beneficial also in providing the required flexibility to cover new services coming to the market. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Bashir, if you could also add your perspective here.
Thank you very much. I think the couple of my other colleagues have really taken the thoughts here on the way the government should be moving forward. But I think it's not just all up to the government, to be quite honest with you. I think competition is going to be very important. And competition is going to drive really in terms of the economics and affordability of services and the availability of these services. And I think that's the key driver. I think one of the things I would much more like to see, as in other parts of the world, is more of hands off the regulatory side of things. Let market drive. Market forces are much greater than regulations, quite honestly. When you have many of the operators there and their services are available with different applications, then the economics and the quality of the service, the affordability of the service the end-to-end solutions that are provided will really drive the market here. Okay, I think what is important, as I think all of us have mentioned and reiterated, is the fact that government can help in the startups in developing these applications. Okay, getting the startups there, made in India kind of aspects, that will not just help the domestic market, but also be in a position to export these applications to other markets, particularly in other developing regions, Africa, Asia Pacific, other parts of Asia Pacific, and so on. So I think the way India and the India government should look at it is really, let's have hands-free kind of thing, minimize the kind of bureaucracy and regulations, but at the same time, let's incentivize our technology startups to do these kind of developments, not just for domestic homegrown market, but also for export potentials and so on. And I think the technologies, as I mentioned, again, combination of different access technologies and the affordability of these services will drive the market. 1.3 billion people in India. Let's have them all connected. This has to be the ambition and the goal for the Indian government. And that's how we're going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bhatia, your concluding remarks.
Yeah, thanks much. And Bashir, it is 1.5 now, not 1.3.
Oh, my God, we're growing much more quicker than even China.
I think there are two things, and I think Rahul and Laura and Bashir already highlighted these. But from my perspective, I think the key issue, which is still a challenge, is the spectrum. Today, the spectrum allocation rules are defined. There's the act now. Hopefully, it will be implemented soon. But I think still I see hesitation within the government to allocate spectrum required for GSO and non-GSO services. Particularly when you look at combining it with the universal license. And I think the universal license have many issues. Just give you one highlight. Now, many of these operators have been issued a GMPSS license. And GMPSS license by definition is in the lower frequency bands and not in the KU and KA band. And whether government will be able to allocate KU and KA band to the licenses which have been issued to the OneWeb and SpaceX and others, I'm not so sure. So perhaps I think there's a need for a review of the policy, both for how the licenses will be loaded. There is no license actually for this non-GSO kind of services that are envisaged in OneWeb or SpaceX or Telesat or others. So I think first they need to create a category of license and make sure that that is aligned to the KU-KA band, which is going to be used for these services, or make it open. So I think on the whole, the regulatory framework, lot has been done. We have traveled a long over the last 5 years, but I think this last mile is still the problem. Spectrum, I would think, is still one of the key challenges, and we must resolve it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time out. I'm sure next time we meet, we'll have all these challenges sorted and